I was rehearsing for my tour, a tour, and I got a bacterial infection, and 1 minute I was alive and dancing around, and the next minute I was in the ICU unit of a hospital, and I woke up from being unconscious for 4 days. No, but it happened by accident, and when I didn't even know my butt was showing, and it wasn't even like the whole butt. It was just like a butt cheek, like half of a butt cheek.
Enough butt to cause a controversy.
Yeah, but when I went backstage, my manager told me my career was over with.
4 days. That's how long Madonna was unconscious, fighting for her life in an ICU bed. What happened when she woke up would change everything.
I've always seen myself as Superwoman. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna kick this. I'm gonna be good. I'm getting back into rehearsals, and I had no strength. I had no energy.
She survived death, but what came after has left fans heartbroken, and the world questioning what happened to the fearless icon they once knew.
Pretty much everybody from that time is dead now, but that's another story. Anywho.
When do you want to start hosting?
At 67, the Queen of Pop is facing something far more brutal than any health crisis. And what she's doing to fight it might be the most tragic part of all. June 24th, 2023. Madonna collapsed in her bathroom and didn't wake up for 4 days. She was rushed to the intensive care unit with what doctors called a serious bacterial infection. But it wasn't just an infection. It was sepsis, a condition that kills approximately 350,000 Americans every year. Her manager, Guy Oseary, posted a statement that sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Madonna had been found unresponsive and admitted to ICU. For 48 hours, doctors kept her in a medically induced coma. She was intubated, on a ventilator, fighting for every breath. Her 6 children gathered around her hospital bed, unsure if their mother would survive. Madonna later revealed that when she first regained consciousness, the only word she could say was no. She believes that was her response to God, asking if she wanted to come with him.
And my mother appeared to me, and she said, "Do you want to come with me?" And I said, no. My assistant was in the room with me, but I was still unconscious, but she heard me say no.
The bacterial infection had progressed to sepsis, a life-threatening condition where the body's response to infection causes widespread inflammation and organ damage. Madonna's lungs, kidneys, and other vital organs were at risk. Doctors worked around the clock to stabilize her, pumping her full of antibiotics and providing intensive supportive care. The survival rate for severe sepsis is around 70%, meaning 3 in 10 patients don't make it. Madonna had always seen herself as invincible. She'd built a 4-decade career on fearlessness, constantly reinventing herself, pushing boundaries, never showing weakness. But sepsis doesn't care about your legacy or your willpower. It attacks indiscriminately, and recovery is brutal. When Madonna finally left the hospital, she could barely stand. She had no strength, no energy, couldn't get out of bed. The woman who had danced for hours on stage couldn't walk across her backyard. Her celebration tour, which was supposed to kick off in Vancouver on July 15th, was postponed indefinitely. Fans who had bought tickets worried they might never see her perform again. Some doctors warned that full recovery from severe sepsis can take months, or even years. Some patients never fully recover their previous level of health and energy.
I started to play the drums, and I found some Elvis Costello records, and that's how I learned to play the drums.
No way.
To his music.
And here we are
And I became a damn good drummer.
But Madonna refused to accept that this was the end. She had spent her entire life overcoming obstacles. Losing her mother at age 5, arriving in New York with $35, clawing her way to the top of an industry that tried to dismiss her as a flash in the pan. She wasn't going to let sepsis be the thing that finally took her down. The recovery process was excruciating. Physical therapy, breathing exercises, slowly rebuilding the strength and muscles that had atrophied during her hospital stay. Madonna later admitted she didn't know when the suffering would end. She didn't know if she'd ever feel like herself again. But what kept her going was the tour. She had made a promise to her fans, and she was determined to keep it. 4 months later, in October 2023, Madonna finally stepped back on stage in London to launch her rescheduled celebration tour. The crowd went wild. She had survived. But the woman who emerged from that hospital wasn't the same Madonna the world had known. The experience had changed her, forced her to confront her own mortality in a way she never had before. And that confrontation would lead to behavior that confused and disturbed the very fans who had cheered her return. Madonna came back from the brink of death with something to prove. But instead of embracing the wisdom and grace that surviving a near-death experience might bring, she doubled down on her lifelong fight against aging. And the world watched in uncomfortable fascination as one of music's greatest icons began posting increasingly bizarre content on social media. The TikTok videos started appearing regularly. Madonna, now 67, using heavy filters that made her face look unnaturally smooth and strangely distorted. Her lips appeared swollen, her cheeks pulled tight, her eyes almost unrecognizable behind the digital manipulation. She'd pout at the camera, stick her tongue out, make exaggerated expressions that felt more like parody than the confident sensuality she'd once embodied.
I'd have a very popular class. It would be controversial. It would be challenging.
Just like,
I'd probably end up in jail.
Yeah.
Fans who had supported her for decades began expressing concern and even embarrassment. Comment sections filled with messages begging her to stop. Why was she trying so hard to look young? Why the constant filters? Why the desperate need for validation from a generation that barely remembered her glory days? The woman who had once told the world to express themselves was now hiding behind digital masks. But it wasn't just the filters. Madonna's real face had changed dramatically too. Dermatologists and plastic surgeons who analyzed her recent appearances pointed to extensive cosmetic procedures, likely including fillers in her cheeks and lips, possible facelifts, and definitely Botox injections that left her face with limited movement and expression. The natural aging process that gives faces character and history had been erased, replaced with the smooth, frozen look that's become synonymous with celebrity desperation. Her behavior at public events raised eyebrows too. She'd show up to award shows and interviews wearing grills, decorative dental jewelry typically associated with hip-hop culture and artists decades younger. She'd make sexual comments that felt more inappropriate than provocative. She'd reference being the gatekeeper of her own image, while simultaneously seeming terrified of what that image had become.
Pretty much everybody from that time is dead now, but that's another story. Anywho.
When do you want to start hosting? If this is the type of humor you're going to bring, America will love it.
Critics began using words like disturbing, unrecognizable, and tragic to describe her transformation. Publications that had once celebrated her boundary-pushing artistry now wrote think pieces about the sadness of watching someone who doesn't know when to let go. The New York Post called her TikTok videos bizarre and inappropriate. The Guardian questioned why people couldn't stop talking about Madonna's strange online behavior. What made it particularly heartbreaking was the contrast. This was the same woman who had released Like a Virgin and shocked the world, who had vogued her way into cultural immortality, who had told an entire generation of women and LGBTQ individuals that they were born this way, before anyone else dared. Madonna had built her empire on fearless authenticity. Now she seemed trapped in a performance of youth that nobody was buying. The irony wasn't lost on observers. Madonna had spent decades fighting against ageism in the music industry. She'd called out the double standard that allowed male rock stars to age naturally, while female pop stars were expected to stay forever young. She'd argued passionately that women should be allowed to express their sexuality at any age. But somewhere along the way, her fight against ageism had morphed into a fight against age itself, and she was losing. Social media has created a new kind of torture for aging celebrities, and Madonna has become its most visible victim. Every appearance, every photo, every video gets dissected by millions of strangers who feel entitled to comment on her face, her body, her choices. The woman who once controlled her image with iron determination now watches helplessly as the internet turns her into a meme. The criticism follows a familiar pattern. First comes shock at her appearance, how different she looks from even a year ago, how the cosmetic procedures seem to be accelerating rather than slowing down. Then comes the mockery. Side-by-side comparisons of Madonna in the 80s versus Madonna now. Jokes about plastic surgery gone wrong. cruel nicknames, and edited photos. Finally comes the pity. The think pieces about how sad it is to watch someone who can't accept aging gracefully.
Especially for women, you know, because we are conditioned to want to aspire to be this beautiful or this great of a mother or, this great of a homemaker or this great of a, it's a test every day to not judge yourself and to not feel like you're lacking in some way.
But here's what makes Madonna's situation uniquely tragic. She's not wrong about the ageism she's fighting against. The music industry absolutely has a double standard. Male artists like Mick Jagger, Bruce Springsteen, and Paul McCartney are celebrated as elder statesmen. Their wrinkles and gray hair are seen as badges of authenticity and hard-earned wisdom. Meanwhile, female artists who dare to age visibly are marginalized, mocked, or simply erased from the conversation. Madonna watched it happen to her peers. She saw how women her age disappeared from radio playlists, from magazine covers, from cultural relevance. She refused to let that be her story. But in fighting so hard against invisibility, she may have made herself invisible in a different way, hidden behind so many procedures and filters, that the real Madonna has vanished. Her children have had to watch their mother become a subject of international ridicule. Her 6 kids range in age from 12 to 27, old enough to see the headlines, read the comments, understand what's being said about their mom. Madonna herself has admitted how painful it is to raise children in an age where comparison and judgment are constant. Now she's experiencing that same cruel judgment, amplified by her fame. The medical risks of her cosmetic journey are real too. Excessive facial fillers can migrate, causing lumps and asymmetry. Repeated Botox can lead to muscle weakness and difficulty with facial expressions. Some procedures carry risks of infection, nerve damage, or permanent disfigurement. For someone who just barely survived sepsis, voluntarily submitting to elective procedures seems like tempting fate.
It's hard not to get anxious or start blaming or taking sides or feeling, you know what I'm saying?
What nobody talks about is how lonely this must be. Madonna is surrounded by people. Managers, assistants, trainers, stylists. But who's telling her the truth? Who's brave enough to say that the filters aren't working, that the procedures have gone too far, that the desperate performance of youth is more painful to watch than aging would ever be? In her own words from the podcast, she talks about abandonment being her greatest fear and her repeated lesson. Perhaps the cruelest abandonment is the one she's inflicted on herself, abandoning the authentic woman she is for a filtered, frozen version that satisfies no one. At 67, Madonna stands at a crossroads that many aging icons face, but few navigate publicly. She survived death, literally fighting her way back from sepsis and coma. She returned to performing, completing a world tour that celebrated 4 decades of groundbreaking artistry. By any measure, these should be her victory laps, a time to be celebrated for longevity, influence, and survival. Instead, she's become a cautionary tale about the impossibility of winning a rigged game. The real tragedy isn't that Madonna is aging. The real tragedy is that she believes her value depends on looking like she isn't. For someone who built a career on fearlessly being herself, the fear of becoming irrelevant has driven her to become someone else entirely. And that someone else, filtered, frozen, performing youth, isn't fooling anyone. It's just making people sad. Her recent spiritual journey, which she discussed at length on the Jay Shetty podcast, reveals the deep internal conflict she's experiencing. She talks about radical acceptance, about embracing what is, about not fighting against the natural flow of life. She studies Kabbalah and speaks eloquently about letting go of ego and attachment. Yet, simultaneously, she's fighting age with every tool modern medicine and technology provide. The disconnect between her spiritual teachings and her visible choices is jarring.
I don't know. I think I'd probably be a school teacher.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I could see you doing that.
I'd have a very popular class. It would be controversial. It would be challenging.
Just like,
I'd probably end up in jail.
Yeah.
In quieter moments, Madonna seems to recognize the trap she's in. She talks about how hard it is to not judge yourself, to not compare yourself to others, to not feel lacking. She admits that even with all her success and fame, these feelings plague her daily. The woman who taught the world about self-expression is still learning how to accept herself. Her children, especially her older kids, must grapple with a complex reality. They've watched their mother nearly die, fight back to health, and then subject herself to entirely optional procedures and online judgment. They see the comments, the mockery, the concern from fans. And they have to reconcile the private mother they know with the public figure the world dissects. Madonna has spoken about how her spiritual practice is teaching her to let go of control over her children's choices and paths. Perhaps she could benefit from applying that same wisdom to her own journey. The music industry that Madonna helped revolutionize hasn't evolved much in terms of how it treats aging women. If anything, the ageism has intensified in the streaming era, where algorithms favor whatever's currently trending. Madonna's fight against this injustice is valid and important, but the methods she's chosen, fighting age itself rather than fighting ageism, have backfired spectacularly. What would it look like if Madonna surrendered to the passage of time? Not giving up on creativity, performance, or relevance, but accepting the face and body that comes with 67 years of living a full, sometimes turbulent, always interesting life. What if she let people see the real woman behind the filters? The one who survived losing her mother at 5, who arrived in New York with nothing and built an empire, who raised 6 children while maintaining a career, who nearly died and fought her way back. That woman would be infinitely more interesting than any filtered TikTok video or cosmetically enhanced red carpet appearance. That woman would have the kind of gravitas and authenticity that actually commands respect and attention. That woman might finally find the peace she's searching for in her spiritual studies. But surrender doesn't seem to be in Madonna's vocabulary. She's still fighting, still performing, still desperately trying to maintain relevance in an industry that's moved on to newer, younger acts. And that might be the most heartbreaking thing of all. Watching someone who changed the world refuse to accept that the world has changed around her. The tragedy of Madonna at 67 isn't that she's old. It's that she's become a prisoner of the very image she spent decades crafting, the eternally youthful, boundary-pushing provocateur. That image doesn't allow for aging, for vulnerability, for the natural evolution of a life well lived. So she's stuck, frozen, not just by Botox, but by her own legend, unable to become the next version of herself, because that version would require a